So, hey, hello everyone. We decided that the optimum time to hold this would be on the third day right after lunch, because that's always like, the collective peak of energy at any conference. So welcome to that experience. So briefly, my name's Rob Esker. So I'm responsible for product and strategy for open ecosystem at NetApp. Actually really excited. Almost immediately after we get off the stage here, I'm going to go do something slightly different. But also, John, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is John Griffith. I am a developer at NetApp. I used to be part of SolidFire. I started the Cinder project way back when, for those of you who may remember me. And since then, I do all sorts of things open sourcey, storage related.
Some of which we'll show you here today.
Yep.
So NetApp and OpenStack. So we've been involved since the very beginning, within, I think, a couple months of the inception of the project. In fact, recall being in the room at Iraq Space when some of this was being sort of bounced back and forth. NetApp was the first of the storage vendors, if you will, commercial storage providers, to have joined the OpenStack community, to have provided upstream integrations. And one really interesting fact is the epic of SolidFire coincides with OpenStack, with the arrival of OpenStack. And I know John will get into this in just a little bit more detail, but in many ways, SolidFire, which is one of the products NetApp focuses our OpenStack effort around, is sort of the design center for it is the same. It is fundamentally cloud. It is very much influenced by OpenStack itself. So along the way, John already mentioned he was the first project technical lead of Cinder, and so that entailed being, one of the primary motive forces in actually making Cinder happen in the first place. Indeed, we also are the founders of the Manila project, which we'll get into a little bit more detail in just a moment, but Cinder, of course, block storage, Manila, shared and distributed file systems as a service. Myself and another guy are the founders of Manila, Ben Schwartzlander, who can't be here with us today. We've enjoyed a tremendous amount of success with deployers. Each one of the OpenStack Foundation user surveys has measured, hey, what do you choose? And amongst the commercial storage providers versus, fully open sort of, in like by default choices you might find in some of the distributions, or at this point all the distributions, we've always been, the leading choice, a position significantly bolstered with the addition of SolidFire, which we acquired 2 years ago. We're also a production deployer at pretty significant scale. Some of our most significant products at NetApp actually are developed and tested on a approximately 10,000 core OpenStack deployment. I was a little disappointed we don't count as members of the 100,000 core club, but I guess aspirationally maybe one day we'll get there. Perhaps we're just too efficient in our development process. Yeah. We also, another example of how widely deployed NetApp tends to be with OpenStack, out of the 8 Super User Award winners, 6 of those are OpenStack on NetApp deployers. I sit on the OpenStack Foundation board. I mentioned we're charter members, project technical lead. We've been very much, heavily involved in the evolution of OpenStack. Indeed, when it comes to the Cinder and Manila projects, as a single entity, NetApp and SolidFire combined have been the single largest organizational contributor to both of those projects in terms of lines of code. And for what it's worth, if you don't like lines of code as a metric, I understand. We could talk about commits, we could talk about a number of other metrics, but lacking a better way to describe it indicates like the size of the investment at NetApp. A commonly asked question, certainly probably heard quite a lot about it here this week and covered it fairly well in the keynote. Jonathan Bryce and Mark Collier and others spoke to it. But I want to offer sort of the NetApp perspective on where we see OpenStack at the moment. You undoubtedly hear quite a lot of the narrative about waning OpenStack or the shine's off. Probably true. The shine is a little bit off. It's less of an unknown quantity. It's proceeding quickly into that boring known capability that you can trust to use. This is, after all, infrastructure as a service, pooling infra resources, managing them. Do you really want that to be exciting is an interesting question. And so that's been good news for deployers. And I'll show in a moment some of our business metrics, sort of more empirically. I can demonstrate like what that's meant in terms of the amount of deployment and how it's being used. I guess the way we see it is, that trough of disillusionment, we're just past it in terms of like the broader narrative. It's increasingly progressing into more of the how, and maybe a little bit less of the what, if that makes sense. And we also see, obviously, if you've been paying attention this week, a lot of confusion over like the whole container story. Does this usurp OpenStack? And our observation, not very often. Most of the time, you need provision for bare metal and VMs as well as containers. Indeed, if you want to provide secure separation to tenants for containers as a service, you almost certainly need VMs underneath it. OpenStack's a great way to do it. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're up to there in just a moment. So this is based on real-world telemetry of deployers using OpenStack on NetApp. And this is the block storage. Actually, this is both block storage and file storage service, so both Cinder and Manila. And you can see that it's always been up and to the right since we've begun measuring this. But the main thing I want to point out somewhat subtly, it's otherwise maybe somewhat subtle, is that the ratio of unique customers to unique systems is changing pretty significantly, which we both know anecdotally, but also have interpreted generally to mean like, hey, this is used, and organic growth is happening, and production workload exists. You're needing to actually expand the breadth and width of the capability. Indeed, just in the last year, we saw about 57% year-over-year growth in deployed systems. So go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is actually really important about that too is it kind of shows the delivery of the promise of the scale-out story of not only OpenStack, but the NetApp storage pieces, right? So the whole idea is that you can start with this and grow it and scale it out as you go. And the data that we have definitely shows that that's exactly what's happening.
So look, there's a huge number of different workloads you're going to need to sort of deliver capabilities for with OpenStack. After all, this is infrastructure as a service. What are the permutations of infra? Well, they're too numerous to list, if possible to list. But you're going to need different characteristics to support different SLAs, different sort of performance profile, different workload requirements. Maybe they're regulatory. And one of the things that NetApp brings is a portfolio of capabilities. Now, we have some very strong preferences on where we think the platforms within our portfolio will make the most sense, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But I just want to leave you with, regardless of what the workloads are, we have a very broad set of capabilities with which to match the requirements to support the SLAs. So whether that's Cinder Manila, you can create your sort of catalog or marketplace, for dev tests, for NFV, for analytics as a service, you name it, and you can support multiple systems behind that same catalog, multiple different capabilities. A common scenario, I'll just go ahead and mention because we get asked about a lot, is Ceph. It's well integrated into every recognizable OpenStack distribution, and so it's become sort of a default choice. So we coexist with it a lot. When folks want to support the no and low SLA requirements, then Ceph is probably a reasonable choice. But when you need to actually deliver pragmatically higher, more elevated SLAs, or you need to trust the crown jewels within your OpenStack infrastructure, then the NetApp tends to be layered in. And we have a variety of different options for that. So we can it's a number of different clicks. Which sort of moves us into, well, what is this if you can move on more. What is this sort of portfolio? I think the first platform we want to talk about, the one we're most excited about in terms of fit to OpenStack is SolidFire. John, would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so SolidFire to me, it's been really exciting and kind of interesting, right? Because the whole thing is, Rob had mentioned, SolidFire was actually architected and designed by our founder, Dave Wright, while he was at Rackspace trying to solve storage problems for OpenStack. So kind of what I tell everybody is it's OpenStack, or SolidFire is actually purpose-built for OpenStack. OpenStack is the model that we had in mind when we designed it. OpenStack is the model that we had in mind when we created our APIs, when we set up our requirements, how things work, what problems we needed to solve, and things like that. And we solved a lot of problems that people just didn't know how to solve at the time, which was a really big deal, especially in a OpenStack or a public cloud type of environment. Completely designed to service any workload, giving you the flexibility and the ability to set parameters on volumes, on a volume per volume basis, on what you need in terms of performance and IOPS, in capacity and things like that. You'll see some of these products out there where you have a minimum size volume of 5 gig or 10 gig or something like that. SolidFire, you get down to 1 gig and anything in between, and as many as you want, right? So, and then again, you also have the same model of scaling out. So that's the built for dynamic infrastructure. The whole idea is we're going to grow with you. We're going to build something. We're going to give you something that you can actually start off with and grow and use, not only with OpenStack, but with other platforms as well, and with other platforms simultaneously. So we're designed to be future-proof and dynamic and grow with you. And then the coolest thing, one of the most important things for us early on was the next generation data center that we always talk about. And that's all about automation and APIs. So everything that you do with a SolidFire cluster is done through the API. There's no extra layers or bolt-ons or anything like that. It's actually built around the API. So the API is a core component as opposed to some products, especially back then. The idea was, hey, I'm going to develop this product, and then I'm going to create an API to bolt onto it, right? So we kind of avoided that. One more?
Yeah. So there's no way we're going to have time to go through all of this in detail. I'm just going to touch upon it. I referenced broad set of capabilities, broad set of requirements that we can match to it. You almost certainly, not everyone in the crowd is going to have familiarity with all of these sort of gray boxes on the bottom. But when you think of a NetApp filer, that's ONTAP. SolidFire, we just described a little bit of some of its compelling capabilities. Centricity or E-Series is a just high throughput, low latency, well-engineered storage device that doesn't really have a lot of higher order data management capabilities. Storage Grid's an object store, Alta-Vault's a backup appliance, and OCI is a way to monitor it all. So I'll go into what that looks like in just a moment, but we've put quite a bit of effort to make sure that whatever NetApp has, in the marketplace that could be compelling to an OpenStack deployer, that we've made sure we've acted to unlock that capability to provide specific integrations so that it's useful in the context of OpenStack. So Cinder, specifically with SolidFire, you actually mentioned a lot of the capabilities. I don't know if you want to speak to this or...
Yeah, sure. So I kind of touched on some of these things and from a general view, there's doesn't mean much, right? But to kind of give you a little more background, so the idea of the SolidFire platform, let's start with the granularity, right? So the idea with that is what we did was we said, hey, let's give you a pool of IOPS and a pool of capacity. And we're going to make those two things independent, and we're going to let you allocate those dynamically however you want, right? So that's the first thing, and that's really important. The second one is predictability. And this was actually one of the primary problems that people were having in cloud environments, was the noisy neighbor issue, right? So what do you do when you have 100 tenants using your storage device, and 5 of those tenants or whatever all of a sudden are doing a backup operation or some kind of a database query or something like that that's spiking the performance or the IOP requirements or demand on the storage device and impacting all the other tenants on that device, right? So what we did was we give guaranteed quality of service. So we guarantee a range of IOPS, minimum to maximum and burst, on a per volume basis, right? And then so by doing that, you no longer have this problem of worrying about somebody else on the system stealing all of your I/O and all of your bandwidth, right? So we control that and we regulate that and we give what's called guaranteed and consistent performance, which is more important than just being fast. Automation, I touched on that. We don't have to go through that. The self-healing, what we use is it's a clustered system. So we automatically handle things like failed drives. We automatically redistribute the blocks throughout the system and take care of that for you. And your users won't even know it happened. You can actually lose an entire node in the cluster. And again, we'll go ahead and redistribute the blocks and figure everything out for you. And in most cases, your users won't know. You won't have any downtime. We do deduplication and compression, always on. It's not an option, it's just a thing. That's how we do it. So every block written into the system gets deduplicated and compressed. So that means you have, incredible efficiencies.
One of the things that I think I was most impressed with when first becoming more familiar with SolidFire, and by the way, that was when I considered them a competitor, was just sort of the day zero operation. I mean, what are we talking about? Like four lines in a comp file, yep, and off you go. And frankly, not everyone's a storage admin, doesn't want to be a storage admin. Oftentimes, OpenStack is deployed by cloud architects. And so you get the qualities of rich storage and data management features delivered by SolidFire, but you get the experience of something that's fully automated, right, and I think better fit to more of a cloud architecture, yeah, operations.
Our goal really was to not be a storage device, but to be a software device. So the idea is you don't need a storage admin. You just need somebody that understands how to do DevOps.
So, you have also probably heard of, if you know NetApp, that is, the filer or data on top, the operating system that operates on it. Our integrations on both Cinder, but more probably even significantly on Manila, the shared file system side, work in all of its different incarnations, whether it's the hardware FAS system that you might be familiar with, the big array that sits in a data center, or perhaps on tap in a VM, or for that matter, on tap as an instance in one of many different clouds. These all actually work with our Cinder and Manila integrations. So we talked a little, we haven't really gotten into immense detail. I guess there's a build here for some reason. Apologies, got to have those logos. Oh, that's odd. Yeah. Sorry about that. What we talked a little bit about, like Cinder in the context of OpenStack. We don't really have time to go into immense detail. We haven't to really go into like some of the feature enablement we've done around, instance creation, efficiencies, some of the replication work, all, the basic feature completeness of it. But one of the things I do want to talk about, actually, I think John is obviously much better equipped to speak to it, is the ability to potentially lever the capabilities of a Cinder in a context beyond OpenStack alone. You'll hear about the explosion of containers. Now, containers might be happening on top of OpenStack. Indeed, OpenStack itself increasingly is going to be delivered itself as a collection of services in containers. But what if I need, to actually just deliver rich storage features in kind with what I expect of Cinder to a Kubernetes environment?
Yeah. So. Anybody that, for folks that have known me for a while, one of the things that when we initially started Cinder, we had the intent and the idea from the start to say, hey, at some point we want this to be a service that's useful not only within the OpenStack ecosystem with things like Nova and things like that, but outside of that as well. So Swift is a good example of this, right? Swift is an object store that does that. NetApp's object store is another example. It's great inside of OpenStack and it works really well, but that's not the only place it works, right? So the idea is we wanted to have Cinder kind of fulfill that same sort of model. And it's turned out that the container space, whether it be Docker, Swarm, or Kubernetes, has been a really natural fit for that. So keep in mind, Cinder has over 70 plus different back-end devices that are supported, that have integrated drivers, that work, that people use, that's trusted. They've been developed over the last 6 years, and a lot of the bugs are worked out, and they're pretty reliable. So what we looked at was, hey, containers are all the rage now, and there's all these things going on with containers. Rather than starting over and creating an entire new framework and an entire new plugin and starting from scratch, what if we just took all of this investment that everybody's already made, we leverage that, and allow you to use that inside of your container deployments, including Kubernetes. So that's what we did. So we've been working on this for a little while. I'm going to kind of walk through a screencast here in a second. But just to kind of give you a preview, what we've done is, first we wanted to make it even easier. Cinder is actually pretty easy to deploy, but we wanted to make it a little bit easier. So what we did is, inside of the GitHub repo for Cinder, there's actually a contrib directory that has all of the pieces to let you containerize Cinder, spin it up using Docker Swarm, and deploy it on your system, right? So if you exclude the building of the images, it takes literally about 2 minutes. And it's pretty foolproof. There's really not much to it. It's actually pretty easy. And then from there, we can go ahead and consume it from Kubernetes, where right now we have some code in the incubator, Kubernetes incubator, that does a external Cinder driver that you can use this block box stuff that I'm about to show you to plug into your Kubernetes environment and utilize your storage. So with that,
I think one more.
so right now what we're going to do is we're going to go into this directory, and we're going to, you're going to see we have a make file. And what that's going to do is actually use the OpenStack Loki project to build a Cinder image, container image to use. And then we're going to go in and we're going to edit the included cinder.conf file that's there. And this is the part about SolidFire. This is all you need is the 5 lines that were there to run SolidFire in a Cinder deployment. So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull these images. We're going to run Docker Compose, which is going to launch all of these containers and give you a working Cinder deployment. So this is all real time at this point. And the bulk of the time is, in this case, is pulling down new images. So we've got 5 Docker containers running: scheduler, API, volume service, database service, Rabbit service. Now you can do a Cinder list, and you'll see we have nothing there. We'll do a Cinder service list and just show you the services running. So that all looks pretty normal. Anybody that's used Cinder has seen all of this multiple times, right? We'll create a volume, things like that. So the thing that's kind of interesting about this is we're running this without any other OpenStack pieces, including Keystone, right? You can, of course, use Keystone if you want, and that still works great. But in this particular example, this is just pure Cinder and nothing else. So you can see everything just works kind of the way you would normally expect. And then we also have the ability, with an extension on Cinder Client, you can do local attaches and things like that yourself. So you can just say Cinder local attach, and the Python Cinder Client is intelligent and smart enough to know and figure out how to attach that volume to the host that you're working on. And that will work with Fiber Channel, iSCSI, Ceph, any of those protocols. And it'll just figure it out on its own. So it makes life really, really simple. So this has been kind of my pet project for a while now, and some of you may have heard me talking about this, but I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty valuable. So, but there you go. In a nutshell, that's kind of where we end up. The rest of this is just kind of showing, hey, we actually did mount it. We can actually write to it and spin it back up somewhere else and attach it again, things like that.
I think there's like a couple different ways that, at least from my perspective, make this really significant. One is if you need to provide a catalog of capabilities, a mature set of block storage features. We're at year 7+ now in OpenStack. That's well supported across the industry. If you need to provide that same capability common across VMs, bare metal, and containers, this does that. And that is not an uncommon scenario at all, increasingly common scenario.
And the other cool thing to think about with this too is you can do things with this, like you can take your existing OpenStack deployment that you have Cinder running in, and you can actually create a tenant specifically for your Kubernetes cluster. And you can use that and have that call in and use that same deployment that you're using elsewhere, right? So now you have a multi-purpose Cinder deployment. So there's all kinds of things like that that if you think about it, depending on your use case and your environment and what you need, it gives you a lot of flexibility. And it gives you the flexibility that, hey, when things change, maybe someday Kubernetes isn't the hotness anymore, and there's some new thing that comes out that everybody's crazy about. You don't have to wait for everybody to catch up and give you something there. You just need to use Cinder. Right? So anyway,
yeah, thanks.
That's what I got.
Awesome. So, okay, let's switch gears just briefly. Talked a lot about Cinder. Would be remiss if didn't talk about Manila. Manila is essentially Cinder, but for shared or distributed file systems. There's a little bit of additional complexity there because you have to plumb into the network, or the tenant network. You have to think about user namespace and auth authority, but conceptually, it is the analog. You might even see a little bit of shared code, or not shared code, but similarity to the code, shall we say.
Copied code.
Perhaps, here and there. We're kind of proud of Manila in the sense that, and welcome both Azure and actually NetApp's playing a big role in Azure's rollout of NFS as a service, and Amazon to the party. Manila predates all of it, so welcome Microsoft and
AWS.
Basically, it does what you might think it does. It either vends existing shares or exports to within multiple instances within a tenant or across tenants. And that could be, that's in the context in which you're dealing with NOAA VMs. But this is also, by the way, also used in a variety of places in a modularly independent way where the rest of OpenStack isn't even necessarily present. This could also be vending these pre-existing shares or exports to containers, to bare metal. It, of course, also can create net new ones as well. So you just move past that. And so all of NetApp's historical strengths in the ONTAP platform around SIFs and NFS are, of course, made evident in a cloud context via Manila. So apologies for these bizarre artifacts, graphical artifacts, but I assure you there's supposed to be a very pretty cloud that says storage grid there at the bottom. And storage grid is the name of NetApp's object storage capability. So whereas we talk about our work in the upstream community, both Cinder and Manila, to actually evolve some of the core capabilities there, but also to provide platform integration against our backend systems. In the case of object storage, we've taken a little bit different approach in that we have something called Storage Grid Web Scale that we are able to avail a Swift and S3 API endpoint that it does support Keystone authentication. For that matter, even actually deploy the thing via heat templates if you prefer. Those exist. The point of it is, though, is we can deliver an object storage capability with a lot of additional characteristics beyond what Swift proper is. So if you have interest in that or questions, please let us know. We can talk to that later. Altavault. Boy, this is going to apparently be the case in all of our remaining slides. So Altavault is a cloud backup appliance. In the context of Cinder, we built some support that allow you to use the Cinder backup service against Altavault. What Altavault will do is it'll essentially compress, encrypt, shard, if you will, place the actual backup content into objects. By the way, we support Swift as one of those object store types. Oh, this one's a build one. So let's just move through that.
That's why.
On-command insight I mentioned earlier, there's a data collector. One of the strengths of on-command insight is not remotely limited to OpenStack. It's one of yet another source of telemetry that it can bring in to provide you kind of a rationalized whole stack view of compute, network, and storage. And it's a powerful set of insights around alarming, proactive sort of analysis of potential problem states. You can even actually do some lightweight sort of costing based off of this as well. The OpenStack support model, I mean, I'm proud to say that, NetApp's participation in both the Cinder and Manila communities, we have fully functional, fairly exhaustive testing via our participation in a continuous integration community. So we have our own CI at NetApp that then advises into the upstream CI. We become, kind of part of the collective gate, if that makes sense. And so to the extent that the test coverage is sufficient, then we've ensured that we haven't broken something here on the polar end and vice versa of OpenStack. All of our Cinder and Manila drivers are actually supported with our entitled systems. So this isn't strictly left to your own devices, onus on you support. We're happy to stand behind our story here. Next slide. Probably sort of the ultimate example of that is, wow. It's not even showing there either.
No.
So is something called FlexPod, which I'm going to just sort of wave my arms about. But FlexPod is a converged infrastructure solution. In this particular case, we've taken SolidFire. We've actually made the Element OS, the operating system on SolidFire, function on essentially Cisco compute. Of course, it's also the case that you have UCS there for all of the other compute needs associated with an OpenStack cloud. Partnered additionally with Red Hat OpenStack Platform to provide sort of a fully compute network storage and in this case OpenStack distribution vendor supported capability. So we don't really have this sort of finger pointing exercise of no, that's their fault. You have a single entry point on support, and it is a validated architecture, so we have tested exhaustively all of these pieces together to make sure that you get a uniform expected deterministic experience. And that's what all those checkboxes, I think, are saying. We're here in the waning hours of the rest of the show. Come visit with us, and certainly I hope we left enough time here for some Q&A. Maybe hit the next slide. Always want to encourage your feedback. We always reserve capacity in our development cycle. Maybe you can speak to this.
Yeah, so this one is actually really important from my perspective. One of the things that I've always done, particularly on the SolidFire side, is the decisions I make for the next release cycle in terms of what I'm going to do with SolidFire and the driver and things like that, and even in Cinder, is all based on feedback that I get from customers and people that are actually deploying and using this, right? So this is actually extremely important. You can come up and talk to me today, grab me on IRC, send me an email, whatever you want. But I'm always interested to hear what people are doing, what kind of use cases they need to solve, things like that. Developing software and developing platforms in a vacuum is not a good thing because we're just going to give you a bunch of garbage that you probably don't want. So bring us your input. Let people know what you need and what you want. So.
And for those times when John is actually on vacation, not immediately available via IRC, if you hit the next slide here, I did want to point you also to a place called NetApp IO, also affectionately known as the pub. NetApp IO, I'm laughing because there's a
missing graphic, yeah.
You can find us on Slack as well.
Yep.
I guess like the IRC of 2017 in some ways, maybe, I'm sure. Variety of channels there, whether it's container-specific or configuration deployment management, some of the work we're doing around CI pipelines, of course, OpenStack itself. We have the broader sort of development and technical community at NetApp present there, as well as some of perhaps your peers in the deployer community.
There's even some PowerShell stuff out there. So.
Yeah, no, I wasn't going to mention that. So.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free.
Oh, and for those of you who have stuck around, we have apparently an Amazon gift card to raffle.
Ooh.
I believe it's in US dollars instead of Australian dollars.
$1 million?
SolidFire Platform, yeah, I express ignorance of pricing, so I couldn't tell you if that would fit in the Amazon gift certificate. I suspect not.